For 30 years, Jack lived without a single touch. No embrace, no comfort, no human warmth, until a maid broke the rule that defined his existence. That moment shattered everything he thought he knew about survival. Once upon a time, in a city of steel towers and calculated power, there lived a man everyone feared, admired, and quietly pitied. His name was Jack Spencer. People called him the King Midas of finance. Everything he touched turned to gold. But they also called him something else when he couldn't hear. The fortress, the untouchable, the man who could not let anyone close. For 3 decades, no one, not business partners, not family, not a single soul, had been allowed to make physical contact with him. Not a handshake at a billion-dollar deal, not a reassuring pat after a triumph, not even the accidental brush of a shoulder in passing. But few people knew why he lived like that. They only saw the surface, a cold, impossibly wealthy man who despised human touch. But the truth was much darker, much more fragile. Jack Spencer was not born broken. He was born joyful, curious, and tender-hearted. When he was a little boy, he loved racing through his family's garden, chasing butterflies with sticky fingers. He loved curling into his mother's lap while she read him stories about brave knights and gentle dragons. He loved the way his older sister would ruffle his hair and call him Little Warrior. But everything shattered the summer Jack turned 7. His mother had taken him to the park, a perfect afternoon filled with ice cream and laughter. She was holding his hand as they crossed the street. Jack could still remember the warmth of her palm, the gentle squeeze she gave his fingers. Then came the screech of tires, the sickening impact, the way her hand went limp in his. In the chaos that followed, the sirens, the strangers pulling him away, the hospital's sterile cold, Jack's young mind forged a terrible equation. Touch equals loss, love equals pain, closeness equals death. His mother survived the accident, but she was never the same. The vibrant woman who danced in the kitchen became a ghost who barely recognized her own son, and Jack, watching her fade day by day, internalized a brutal lesson. The people you hold on to are the ones who get taken away. So he stopped holding on. By the time Jack was 12, he had already begun building his fortress. No sleepovers, no sports teams, no chance for anyone to get physically close. His father, drowning in his own grief and medical bills, barely noticed. His sister, overwhelmed and desperate to escape, left for college and rarely looked back. Jack was alone, and alone, he convinced himself, was safe. He channeled everything, all his rage, all his loneliness, all his brilliant, desperate energy, into success. By 25, he'd made his first million. By 30, his first billion. By 40, he was one of the most powerful men in the world. But power came with a price. And Jack's price was simple, absolute, terrifying. Rule number 1, do not touch Mr. Spencer. It was written into every employment contract, whispered as a warning to every new staff member, enforced with immediate, devastating consequences. One executive had reached out to shake Jack's hand at a merger celebration. He was fired before his palm could make contact. A well-meaning assistant had tried to steady Jack when he stumbled. She was escorted from the building within the hour, her career in ruins. The rule was not negotiable. It was not a quirk. It was the invisible electric fence that kept Jack Spencer's world in perfect, agonizing order. The Spencer Manor reflected its master perfectly. Built of glass and white marble, it rose like a mausoleum in the hills overlooking the city. Beautiful, pristine and utterly devoid of warmth. Every surface gleamed, every corner was monitored. Every person who entered understood they were in a temple to control, a monument to isolation. Jack lived there like a king in a cage of his own making, surrounded by staff who moved like shadows, careful never to cross the invisible barrier around him, hosting parties where guests admired his art collection but never dared approach him directly, sleeping alone in a bedroom larger than most apartments, where the silence was so complete he could hear his own heartbeat echoing off the walls. And for 30 years, this worked. This terrible, lonely system worked. But before we dive deeper into this story, please kindly take a moment to comment below with the city you are watching this video from. Hit the like button, and also don't forget to subscribe to the channel to help me to reach my first 1,000 subscribers, if you haven't done that already. Until the day Jennifer Sanford walked through his door, looked at the man everyone feared, and saw something no one else had bothered to notice. Not a fortress, but a prisoner. Not a king, but a boy still holding his mother's hand on a sunny afternoon, waiting for the world to stop stealing what he loved. She didn't know it yet. Neither did he. But she was about to break the only rule that mattered. And in breaking it, she would finally set them both free. This is the story of the cold billionaire who spent 30 years believing that isolation was strength, and the gentle woman who proved that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is reach out your hand and refuse to let go. Jennifer Sanford had exactly $47 in her bank account the morning she walked into the employment agency. She knew the exact number because she'd checked it 3 times the night before, each refresh of her phone screen confirming the same cruel reality. $47 between her family and disaster. Her father's medical bills had piled up like autumn leaves, beautiful in their variety, deadly in their weight. Stage 3 cancer didn't care that her mother had already worked 2 jobs for 15 years. It didn't care that Jennifer's younger brother was 2 semesters away from finishing college. Disease was the ultimate creditor, and it always collected. So when the agency coordinator, a thin woman with sympathetic eyes and a voice like old paper, slid the offer letter across the desk, Jennifer didn't hesitate. She didn't even read past the salary line. $25,000 a month, live-in position, immediate start. It was more money than her family had seen in a year. It was a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. It was impossible to refuse. "There are some unusual requirements," the coordinator said carefully, "the way someone might warn you about a dog that sometimes bites. Mr. Spencer is very particular about his household, very private. You'll need to sign several documents before we can proceed." Jennifer signed everything: the non-disclosure agreement with its forest of legal jargon, the confidentiality clause that threatened lawsuits for even mentioning her employer's name, the background authorization that would examine every corner of her life. Then came the final document, 2 pages, single-spaced. The coordinator's finger trembled slightly as she pointed to the highlighted section. Physical Contact Protocol. Under no circumstances is any staff member to make physical contact with Mr. Spencer. This includes, but is not limited to, handshakes, shoulder touches, steadying gestures, or any form of skin-to-skin contact. Violation of this rule will result in immediate termination and forfeiture of all compensation. Jennifer read it twice, then a 3rd time certain she'd misunderstood. "I'm sorry, I don't—" "He doesn't want to be touched? At all?" The coordinator's sympathetic eyes had gone flat, professional. "Those are the terms. They are non-negotiable. Many qualified candidates have declined the position because of this requirement. If you're uncomfortable—" "I'll take it," Jeniffer said quickly. Too quickly, perhaps, but desperation had a way of making decisions simple. Her father needed medicine. Her mother needed sleep. Her brother needed a future. What did it matter if her employer was eccentric? Rich people were always strange. This was just another flavor of wealth's peculiar loneliness. The coordinator nodded, unsurprised. She'd seen this calculation before, the arithmetic of necessity that made people agree to impossible things. 3 days later, Jeniffer stood at the gates of Spencer Manor with a single suitcase and a heart beating against her ribs like a trapped bird. The house rose before her like something from a dream or a nightmare, depending on how the light hit it. All that glass and marble, cold and perfect as a diamond, beautiful in the way a sword is beautiful, elegant and lethal. The head of household staff, a severe woman named Mrs. Chen, who looked like she'd been carved from the same marble as the manor, met her at the door. No welcoming smile, no small talk, just a sharp once-over that catalogued every scuff on Jennifer's shoes, every thread pulling loose from her coat. "You've read the rules," Mrs. Chen said. Not a question. "Yes, ma'am." "Read them again." Mrs. Chen thrust a laminated card into Jennifer's hands, the physical contact protocol condensed to wallet size. "Keep this with you at all times. Mr. Spencer is not forgiving. There are no second chances, no explanations accepted. You touch him, you're gone. Do you understand?" Jeniffer looked down at the card, at the bold red letters screaming their warning. Something cold settled in her stomach. Not fear exactly. She'd lived with fear for months now, the constant companion of financial ruin. This was something else, a strange creeping sadness for a man she'd never met, who needed a laminated card to keep the world at arm's length. "I understand," she whispered. Mrs. Chen's expression softened, just slightly, just for a moment. "Good, because between you and me, Miss Sanford, this job pays well for a reason. It's not the work that's hard, it's the loneliness. This house is full of beautiful things and empty of everything that matters. If you can survive that, you'll be fine." Then she turned and walked into the manor, and Jeniffer, with her $47, and her desperate hope and her promise not to touch, followed her into the cold, gleaming silence. Jack Spencer had fired 11 personal aides in the past 14 months. Some lasted a week. One memorable disaster made it only 45 minutes before her cheerful attempt at small talk sent him into such a visceral panic that security had to escort her out, while he locked himself in his study, heart hammering, skin crawling with phantom sensations. He didn't expect this one to be different. From his second-floor office, he watched through the window as Mrs. Chen led the new hire across the entrance courtyard. Another young woman with desperate eyes and careful steps, walking into his fortress like all the others. He'd learned not to bother learning their names until they survived the first month. It saved disappointment. He turned back to his computer screens, to the comfortable abstraction of numbers and projections where nothing could touch him. But something was wrong. It took Jack 3 hours to identify the problem. He was working through a hostile takeover bid, the kind of high-stakes warfare that usually required absolute focus, when he realized his shoulders had dropped. Not much. Just a fraction, but for a man who'd lived 30 years in a perpetual state of vigilant tension, any relaxation was extraordinary. He saved his work and stood, moving to the window that overlooked the library below. She was there. The new aide, Jeniffer, according to the file Mrs. Chen had left on his desk, was dusting the bookshelves with methodical precision. Nothing unusual about the scene. Staff cleaned constantly. The manor ran like a well-oiled machine specifically because people knew how to be invisible. But she wasn't invisible. Or rather, she was, but in a different way. Most of his staff moved through the house like nervous cats in a room full of rocking chairs. Hyper-aware, overcautious, their anxiety a tangible thing that made Jack's own worse. They broadcast their fear of making mistakes, of crossing invisible lines, of triggering the cold billionaire's wrath. This woman moved like water, calm, unhurried. She reached for a book, checked behind it, replaced it with the same careful attention she'd given the one before. No performance, no anxiety, just quiet, steady presence. Jack's chest felt strange, looser somehow. He told himself it was coincidence. Probably the new medication his doctor had prescribed, or the successful quarterly reports, or simple fatigue making him less reactive. He went back to work, but the next morning, when he came down for his 7 a.m. coffee, precisely timed so he'd have the kitchen to himself, she was there, not in his way, not intruding, just standing at the far counter, preparing a breakfast tray for Mrs. Chen, her movements efficient and unobtrusive. She glanced up when he entered. Their eyes met for exactly 2 seconds. She nodded once, respectful but not fearful, and returned to her work. Jack's usual morning routine involved a specific pattern. Retrieve coffee from the carafe Mrs. Chen always prepared, drink it standing at the window overlooking the city, spend exactly 10 minutes in silence before returning to his office. He never deviated. Deviation meant unpredictability, and unpredictability meant danger. But this morning he found himself taking his coffee to the breakfast nook instead, a small table near the window, still alone, still separate. But somehow, with her quiet presence in the room, the silence felt less like a tomb and more like peace. She finished the tray and carried it toward the door. She would have to pass within 6 feet of him. Jack braced automatically, his body preparing for the familiar spike of adrenaline, the crawling sensation that came when anyone entered his perimeter. It didn't come. She walked past, a respectful distance, eyes forward, no acknowledgement, and the panic he'd learned to expect simply wasn't there. Just the faint scent of soap and the soft sound of her footsteps on marble. Jack sat frozen with his coffee cup halfway to his lips, his entire nervous system trying to process an absence, like phantom pain in reverse. Where there should have been fear, there was nothing. Where there should have been tension, there was only this strange, disorienting calm. He didn't understand it. He didn't trust it. But 3 days later, when Mrs. Chen asked if the new aide was satisfactory or if he'd like to begin interviewing replacements, Jack heard himself say, "She's fine. Keep her on." Mrs. Chen's eyebrows rose slightly, the most surprise she ever showed. "Sir? Are you certain?" "I thought perhaps I said keep her." His voice came out sharper than intended, defensive, protective of something he couldn't name. Mrs. Chen nodded and left, and Jack returned to his desk with the uncomfortable awareness that he'd just made an exception. A small one, barely noticeable, but exceptions were how fortresses fell. That evening he found himself working in the library instead of his office. Pure coincidence, he told himself. Better light, change of scenery. Nothing to do with the fact that Jennifer was scheduled to clean the main floor rooms after 8 p.m. She arrived precisely on time, carrying her supplies with that same unhurried grace. She saw him at his desk in the corner and hesitated, the first uncertain moment he'd witnessed from her. "I can come back later, Mr. Spencer," she said quietly. "I don't want to disturb you." "You're not disturbing me." The words came automatically, and only after he'd spoken them did Jack realize they were true. For the first time in 3 decades, another person's presence in his space wasn't an intrusion. It was something else entirely, something that felt dangerously close to comfort. She worked in silence while he pretended to read contracts, but really he was aware of her in a way that should have terrified him. The soft sound of cloth on wood, the careful way she moved around furniture, the peace that seemed to radiate from her like warmth from a fire. When she finally finished and wished him good night, Jack found himself reluctant to see her go, and that, more than anything, told him he was in trouble. Victoria Stone had been planning her future for 7 years, and it did not include competition from a woman who dusted bookshelves for a living. She swept into Spencer Manor on a Thursday afternoon, her heels clicking against marble with the confident rhythm of ownership. The staff knew her well, too well, perhaps. She'd been Jack's business partner since the founding of Spencer Stone Ventures, and in that time she'd cultivated the careful fiction that she belonged here, that it was only a matter of time before her last name replaced the brass nameplate on the mailbox. Jack was in a meeting downtown, but Victoria had her own key. She often did this, arrived unannounced, made herself comfortable in his space, left traces of her perfume in rooms he'd occupy later. Subtle, territorial markings that reminded everyone, including Jack, that she was permanent while others were merely temporary. "Mrs." Chao Chen greeted her with professional courtesy that bordered on cold. "Miss Stone, Mr. Spencer isn't expected back until 6. "I'm aware." Victoria handed over her coat like a queen dismissing a servant. "I'll wait in the study. Bring me the Chateau Margaux and the quarterly reports." She was halfway across the foyer when she saw her. The new girl, young, pretty, in an understated way, moving through the hallway with an armful of fresh linens. Nothing remarkable about the scene. Staff were always moving through this house like ghosts. Victoria had stopped noticing them years ago, but this one was humming, softly, almost inaudibly, but humming nonetheless. Some gentle melody that made the cold marble corridors feel inexplicably warmer, and more damningly, she was smiling. Not the tight professional expression of someone performing a role, but a real smile, small and private, as if she knew a secret the rest of the world didn't. Victoria's instincts, honed by years of corporate warfare, began screaming warnings. She watched the girl disappear up the stairs, then turned to Mrs. Chen with a smile that could freeze blood. "New hire." "Yes, ma'am. Jeniffer Sanford. She's been with us 3 weeks now." 3 weeks. Longer than most lasted. Victoria's jaw tightened imperceptibly. "And Mr. Spencer is satisfied with her performance." Mrs. Chen hesitated, just a fraction of a second, but Victoria caught it. "Very satisfied, ma'am. He's asked that she remain on permanent staff." The words landed like a slap. Jack never kept anyone permanently. His turnover was legendary, a revolving door of terrified assistants and short-term hires. The fact that he'd made an exception, that he'd specifically requested this girl stay, sent alarm bells clanging through Victoria's carefully constructed plans. She spent the next 2 hours in Jack's study, reviewing reports she'd already memorized, drinking wine she didn't taste, and listening, waiting. When she finally heard the soft footsteps in the hallway outside, she moved with predatory precision. Jeniffer was arranging flowers in the hall vase, white lilies, delicate and pure. She looked up when Victoria appeared, her expression open and friendly in a way that made Victoria's blood simmer. "Hello," Jeniffer said warmly. "You must be Miss Stone. Mr. Spencer mentioned you'd be stopping by." "Did he?" Victoria's smile was all edges. "How nice that he discusses his schedule with the help." The warmth in Jennifer's eyes flickered, but didn't die. "Is there something I can get for you? More wine, perhaps?" "No." Victoria stepped closer, invading the space most people instinctively protected. "But there is something I'd like to clarify. I've been Jack's partner for 7 years. I've built empires with him, saved his company from collapse, stood beside him when everyone else walked away. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" Jennifer's hand stilled on the flowers. "I'm not sure I do, ma'am." "Let me be clearer." Victoria's voice dropped to a whisper, intimate and venomous. "I've seen girls like you before, pretty, gentle, thinking you can make a difference in a broken man's life, thinking you're special because he tolerates your presence. But you're not special, Jeniffer. You're convenient. And the moment you forget your place, you'll discover exactly how replaceable you are." Something shifted in Jennifer's expression, not fear, but a quiet sadness that somehow made Victoria even angrier. "I'm just trying to do my job, Miss Stone. Your job is to dust furniture and stay invisible. Your job is not to smile at him like you understand his pain. Your job is not to make him comfortable or calm or whatever it is you think you're doing." Victoria leaned in, her perfume expensive, overpowering, filling the space between them. "Jack Spencer is going to be my husband. This will be my house. And when that happens, girls who don't know their place will find themselves back where they started. Do we have an understanding?" Jeniffer met her gaze steadily, and for a moment Victoria saw something unexpected there. Not submission, but compassion. As if this minimum-wage maid actually pitied her. "I understand perfectly, ma'am," Jeniffer said softly, but as Victoria walked away, her heels clicking triumph against the marble, she couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that the girl had understood something entirely different than what Victoria had intended. That somehow, in this brief confrontation, Victoria had revealed more weakness than strength. She pushed the thought away. She was Victoria Stone. She didn't lose to women who arranged flowers and smiled at broken men. She had never lost anything in her life. And she wasn't about to start now. It happened on a Tuesday morning in the most mundane way possible, which somehow made it more terrifying than any dramatic catastrophe could have been. Jack was descending the main staircase, coffee in one hand, phone in the other. His attention split between a text from his CFO and the marble steps that had never once betrayed him in the 10 years he'd lived in this house. He knew every inch of this fortress. Every surface was predictable, controlled, safe, which is why he didn't see the small puddle of water at the landing. Someone, the new cleaning crew probably, had mopped and failed to dry completely. Just a few drops, nearly invisible, against the pale stone. Jack's Italian leather shoe hit the wet spot and slid forward with sickening speed. The world tilted. His phone flew from his hand, clattering against marble. The coffee cup followed, hot liquid arcing through the air in slow motion. His body pitched backward, arms windmilling uselessly, his mind already calculating the angle of impact, the probability of serious injury. The loss of control that was worse than any physical pain. He was going to fall. He was going to hit the stairs, and there was nothing. Jeniffer appeared out of nowhere. She'd been in the hallway below, carrying fresh towels to the guest rooms. Later, Jack wouldn't remember seeing her there, wouldn't remember anything except the moment she dropped everything and lunged forward, her arms reaching out to catch him, her body moving with the pure instinct of someone who couldn't watch another human being hurt themselves. Time fractured into crystalline shards. Jack saw her hands coming toward him, elegant brown fingers, palms open, reaching for his chest, his shoulders, anywhere that would stop his fall. Saw the concentration on her face, the absolute focus of someone about to break the cardinal rule. The rule that defined his entire existence, and for one impossible heartbeat, he wanted her to touch him, wanted it with a desperation that terrified him more than the fall ever could. But Jennifer's eyes met his in that suspended moment, and something passed between them. Understanding, horror, recognition of the line they were about to cross. She twisted mid-lunge, redirecting her momentum, her hands grasping instead for the banister beside him. She caught it and used it to brace herself, creating a human barrier between Jack and the stairs without ever making contact. Jack's backward fall stopped as abruptly as it started. He slammed into the wall behind him instead of the stairs, his shoulder taking the impact, his body held upright by sheer momentum and the narrow space Jennifer's presence had created. They stood frozen. Jack pressed against the wall, breathing hard. Jeniffer braced against the banister, her arms still extended in the ghost of an embrace that never happened. Her body less than a foot from his, close enough that he could feel the heat radiating from her skin, close enough that he could smell the simple soap she used, the faint scent of laundry detergent on her uniform, close enough that if either of them moved even slightly, the rule would shatter. "Mr. Spencer," her voice came out shaky, barely a whisper. "Are you hurt?" Jack couldn't speak. His heart was hammering so violently he thought it might crack his ribs. Every nerve ending in his body was screaming contradictory messages: run, stay, panic, peace. The usual suffocating anxiety was there, yes, but threaded through with something else. Something warm and terrifying and utterly foreign. He wanted her closer. The realization hit him like a second fall, more devastating than the first. For 30 years, he'd built his life around avoiding exactly this, the proximity of another human being, the dangerous warmth of connection. And now, pressed against this wall, with this woman hovering in his space like a guardian angel who'd stopped just short of salvation, he wanted nothing more than to close that final impossible distance. "I'm fine," he managed, though his voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. "You can step back." Jeniffer didn't move immediately. Her eyes searched his face with an intensity that felt like its own kind of touch. You're sure? You hit the wall pretty hard. Step back. Harsher this time, because if she didn't move soon, he was going to do something unforgivable. He was going to reach for her. He was going to cross his own line. She retreated slowly, lowering her arms, putting blessed distance between them. But the damage was already done. The air still hummed with the electricity of almost contact, the ghost of what hadn't happened haunting the space between them. "I'm sorry," Jeniffer said quietly, bending to retrieve his phone, his empty coffee cup, her towels, all scattered across the landing like evidence of a disaster narrowly averted. "There was water on the floor. I should have seen it. Should have warned you." "It's not your fault," Jack pushed off the wall, testing his shoulder, his balance, his ability to function like a normal human being instead of a man coming apart at the seams. "I wasn't paying attention. He should fire her." The thought came automatically, a reflex born of 30 years of self-preservation. She'd come too close. She'd nearly touched him. She'd made him want to be touched. Any of those offenses alone justified immediate dismissal. But when he opened his mouth to say the words, what came out instead was, "Thank you." Jeniffer looked up at him, towels clutched to her chest, something raw and vulnerable in her expression. "I couldn't just watch you fall." "I know," Jack said softly. And that was the problem, wasn't it? She couldn't watch him fall, couldn't maintain the professional distance everyone else found so easy, couldn't treat him like the untouchable fortress he'd spent 3 decades becoming. She treated him like he was human, like he was worth saving. Jack turned and walked away before he could do something stupid. Before he could ask her name, even though he already knew it. Before he could tell her that in 30 years no one had ever moved to catch him. Before he could admit that for one terrible, beautiful moment, he'd wanted her to. The email arrived at 4:47 p.m. on a Friday, and with it, Jack Spencer's carefully constructed world began to crumble. Confidential. SEC investigation, Spencer Stone Ventures, insider trading allegations. Jack read it 3 times, certain his eyes were betraying him. Insider trading, securities fraud, evidence suggesting systematic manipulation dating back 18 months, trades made under his authorization code, his digital signature on documents he'd never seen, his name, his reputation, his entire empire built over 3 decades, suddenly balanced on the edge of a knife. The second email came 2 minutes later, this one from his lead attorney. "Jack, we need to talk immediately. The evidence is damning. Someone with access to your accounts has been setting you up for months." His hand started shaking. Not the small tremor of stress, but the violent shaking of a body in revolt. Jack pushed back from his desk, his mind racing through possibilities, through the short list of people with that level of access to his systems. His phone buzzed. A text from Victoria. "Emergency board meeting called for Monday morning. They're voting on your removal as CEO." "I'm so sorry, Jack. I tried to stop them." The room tilted. Jack stood on legs that felt like water, stumbling toward the window, gulping air that wouldn't fill his lungs. 30 years of work, 30 years of control. Everything he'd built to prove he didn't need anyone. That isolation was strength. That walls kept you safe. All of it disintegrating like smoke. His phone rang. His lawyer. Jack let it go to voicemail. It rang again. The chairman of his board. Voicemail. Again. 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 Each ring like a hammer blow to the fortress walls, each call another person who wanted something from him, needed him to be strong, expected him to have answers when he had nothing but the screaming certainty that he'd been betrayed by someone close enough to destroy him. Jack's knees buckled. He caught himself on the edge of his desk, but the shaking had spread to his entire body now. His chest was too tight. His vision was blurring at the edges. Somewhere in the distance, he could hear his own breathing, ragged, desperate, the sound of a man drowning on dry land. The panic attack took him like a wave, sudden and absolute. He'd had them before, in the early years after the accident, but he'd learned to control them, to breathe through them, to lock them down behind the same walls that kept everything else at bay. But this time, the walls weren't holding. Jack slid to the floor, his back against the desk, his hands clutching at his chest as if he could physically hold his heart together. Tears came without permission, hot, humiliating tears that he hadn't cried since he was 7 years old, standing in a hospital corridor, covered in his mother's blood. Touch equals loss, love equals pain, closeness equals death. The old equation roared back with savage clarity. He'd let his guard down. He'd let Victoria into his business. He'd let Jeniffer into his space. He'd started to believe that maybe, possibly, he could have something beyond the fortress, and look what had happened. Betrayal, destruction, the very thing he'd spent 30 years trying to prevent. Jack's sobs came harder now, his body curling in on itself, his forehead pressed to his knees. He was 7 years old again, watching his mother's eyes go vacant. He was 12, realizing his father had stopped seeing him as a son and started seeing him as a reminder of everything lost. He was 17, standing at his sister's wedding, the only family member without a +1, learning that loneliness was just another word for safety. He was 37, alone on the floor of his study, crying like a broken child because he'd forgotten the most important lesson. Walls exist for a reason. The door opened. Jack didn't look up, couldn't look up. Didn't care who saw him like this anymore because what did it matter? His empire was burning. His reputation was ash. Everything he'd built to prove he didn't need anyone had been torn down by someone he'd trusted. "Mr. Spencer?" Jennifer's voice, soft, concerned, entirely wrong for this moment because she shouldn't be here, shouldn't see him like this, shouldn't— "Please go away." His voice broke on the words, raw and destroyed. "Just leave me alone." He heard her footsteps. Good. She was leaving. Everyone always left, eventually. It was better this way, safer. But the footsteps came closer. Jack looked up through tears that blurred everything and saw her standing there, this woman who'd nearly caught him on the stairs, who'd brought peace to his haunted house, who was looking at him now with an expression that shattered something deeper than his pride. She wasn't horrified by his tears. She wasn't afraid of his breakdown. She looked at him like he was worth saving. "You don't have to be alone," Jeniffer said quietly, and the words landed like a promise and a threat and a lifeline all at once. Jack shook his head, fresh tears spilling over. "You don't understand. Everyone I trust destroys me. Everyone I let close takes something. It's better if you just—" "I'm not going anywhere," she interrupted, her voice steady as stone. "Not unless you look me in the eye and tell me you genuinely want me to leave." Jack tried. He opened his mouth to say the words, to send her away, to rebuild the walls that were supposed to keep him safe. But he couldn't, because for the first time in 30 years. He didn't want to be alone, and that terrified him more than any betrayal ever could. Jennifer had learned many things in her 28 years of life. She'd learned that medical bills could multiply faster than hope. She'd learned that pride was a luxury people like her couldn't afford. She'd learned that sometimes love meant working 3 jobs and sleeping 4 hours a night and pretending everything was fine when your father asked how you were doing. But she'd never learned how to watch someone suffer alone. Jack Spencer sat crumpled on the floor of his study like a king whose throne had been torn from beneath him. His shoulders shook with sobs he was trying desperately to suppress. His hands covered his face as if he could hide his humanity behind his palms. He looked nothing like the cold billionaire who'd built an empire on the foundation of never needing anyone. He looked like a boy who'd been hurt too many times and had finally run out of places to hide the pain. Jennifer's hands trembled at her sides. She knew the rule. God, did she know the rule? It was printed on the laminated card in her pocket. It was written into every contract she'd signed. It was the reason she'd been able to send her father to the specialist last week. The reason her brother could focus on his final exams instead of looking for work. The reason her mother had finally been able to quit her night shift at the diner. $25,000 a month. Her family's salvation. All contingent on one simple requirement: don't touch Mr. Spencer. Breaking that rule meant losing everything. But watching him shatter alone meant losing something infinitely more valuable, the part of herself that believed in choosing compassion even when it cost everything. "I'm going to come closer now," Jennifer said quietly, giving him the choice, the warning. "You can tell me to stop, you can fire me, but I can't watch you hurt like this and do nothing." Jack's head snapped up, his eyes red-rimmed and wild. "Don't, please don't. I can't." His voice broke. "If you touch me, I'll fall apart completely. I won't survive it." "You're already falling apart," Jennifer said gently, taking one step forward. "And you're surviving it right now, alone, the way you've survived everything alone for 30 years. But what if you didn't have to?" "You don't understand." Fresh tears tracked down Jack's face. "Everyone I let close destroys me. My mother, my father, my sister, Victoria, everyone. Touch means loss. It always has." "Or," Jennifer said, taking another step, "touch means you're not alone in the loss, that someone else is willing to share the weight so you don't have to carry it all by yourself." She knelt down in front of him, still not touching, her hands resting on her own knees, close enough now that she could see every tear, every tremor, every crack in the fortress he'd built around his heart. "I'm going to lose my job for this," she said softly. "I'm going to walk out of here with nothing. But before I do, I need you to know something. You are not broken beyond repair. You are not too damaged to deserve comfort. And what happened to you when you were 7 years old was not your fault." Jack's breathing hitched. "How did you—" "Mrs. Chen told me. She thought I should know why the rule existed." Jennifer lifted her hand slowly, telegraphing every movement. "I'm going to touch you now, Jack, and it's going to be okay. I promise you, it's going to be okay." "Please," he whispered, and she didn't know if he was begging her to stop or continue. She chose to believe it was permission. Jennifer placed her hands on Jack's shoulders, gentle, steady, warm. The contact was electric. Jack flinched as if she'd burned him, his entire body going rigid. with 30 years of conditioning screaming at him to pull away, to run, to rebuild the walls before it was too late. But she didn't let go. "Breathe," she whispered. "Just breathe. I've got you." And something in Jack's fortress finally, irrevocably, shattered. He collapsed forward, his forehead dropping to her shoulder, his hands clutching at the fabric of her uniform like a drowning man grasping a lifeline. The sobs that tore from him were primal, decades of suppressed grief and loneliness and terror pouring out in waves that shook them both. Jeniffer wrapped her arms around him fully now, one hand cradling the back of his head, the other rubbing slow circles on his back. She didn't shush him or tell him it would be fine or offer empty platitudes. She just held him while he broke apart, providing the physical anchor he'd denied himself for 3 decades. "I've got you," she repeated, her own tears falling silently into his hair. "You're not alone anymore. I've got you." Jack cried until he had nothing left, until his body was empty of everything except exhaustion and the strange, terrifying sensation of being held, of being touched without pain following, of being vulnerable and not immediately destroyed. When he finally lifted his head, his eyes met hers with something that looked like wonder and terror in equal measure. "You touched me," he said hoarsely. "I did. You broke the rule." "I did." "Why?" The question came out broken, desperate. "Why would you sacrifice everything for this? For me?" Jennifer's hand came up to cup his cheek, another touch, deliberate and gentle. "Because everyone deserves to be held when they're falling apart, even cold billionaires who've convinced themselves they're better off alone." Jack leaned into her palm, his eyes closing, and for the first time in 30 years he let himself believe that maybe touch didn't equal loss. Maybe it equaled love. Jack woke at dawn with the unfamiliar sensation of having slept through the night without nightmares. His shoulder ached from lying on the study floor. He'd fallen asleep there, too exhausted to move after the storm of tears had finally passed. Someone had covered him with a blanket. He knew without checking whose hands had tucked it around his shoulders, the same hands that had held him while he shattered. He sat up slowly, his body stiff, his mind carefully blank. If he didn't think about what had happened, about the way he'd collapsed into her arms, about the warmth of her touch, about the 30-year rule lying in pieces around him, then maybe he could pretend nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Jack found her in the kitchen at 6:30 a.m., exactly where she shouldn't be on a Saturday morning. Staff had weekends off unless specifically requested. She should have been gone, should have packed her single suitcase and walked away from the job she'd sacrificed for a moment of compassion. Instead, she was making coffee. She looked up when he entered, and something passed between them. Not awkwardness exactly, but the profound intimacy of two people who'd crossed a line together and couldn't pretend they hadn't. "You're still here," Jack said. It came out like an accusation and a prayer. "I'm still here." Jeniffer poured 2 cups with steady hands. "Mrs. Chen tried to dismiss me this morning. I told her she'd need to hear it from you directly." Jack should fire her. The rule existed for a reason. She'd violated the single most important protocol in his entire household. He should escort her out personally, pay her severance, and immediately hire someone who understood boundaries. "How do you take your coffee?" he asked instead. A small smile touched her lips. "Cream," no sugar. They sat at the breakfast nook, the same place he'd found himself gravitating toward since she'd started working here. The early morning light filtered through the windows, turning the cold marble warm. Neither of them spoke for a long moment, the silence comfortable in a way Jack had never experienced with another human being. "I looked at the evidence last night," Jeniffer said quietly. "After you fell asleep, your laptop was open." Jack's hands tightened on his cup. "You shouldn't have." "It was Victoria." Not a question, a statement of fact delivered with the calm certainty of someone who'd seen the truth and wasn't surprised by it. She had the access, she had the motive, and she's been positioning herself as your successor for years. Jack nodded slowly. He'd reached the same conclusion sometime around 3 a.m., lying on the floor with Jennifer's blanket wrapped around him. All the pieces fit too perfectly. Victoria's convenient texts, her emergency board meeting, her sympathy that felt less like compassion and more like a predator circling wounded prey. "I trusted her," Jack said, the words tasting like ash. "I know." Jennifer's hand moved across the table, not touching him, but close enough that he could feel the warmth. "And that's not a weakness, Jack. The fact that you can still trust people after everything you've been through, that's extraordinary. It almost destroyed me." "But it didn't. You're still here." She paused, then added softly, "And this time, you didn't fall apart alone." Jack looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since she'd arrived. She had shadows under her eyes, evidence that she'd stayed up watching over him instead of sleeping. Her uniform was wrinkled from kneeling on the floor for hours. She looked exhausted and beautiful and impossibly brave. "Why didn't you leave?" he asked. "You could have walked away, found another job, protected yourself." "Because leaving someone alone the morning after they've finally let themselves break is cruel." Jennifer met his gaze steadily. "And because I wanted to be here, wanted to make sure you were okay." Something in Jack's chest cracked open, not the violent shattering of the night before, but a gentler breaking, the kind that lets light in. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "I've spent 30 years keeping everyone at a distance. I don't know how to let someone close without waiting for the other shoe to drop." "Then we'll figure it out together." She said it like it was simple, like 3 decades of trauma could be unraveled with patience and presence. One day at a time, one cup of coffee at a time. Jack found himself reaching out, slowly, deliberately, giving himself every chance to stop, until his hand covered hers on the table. The contact sent electricity up his arm, but beneath the fear was something else, something warm and steady and achingly real. Jennifer didn't pull away, didn't flinch, just turned her hand over so their palms pressed together, her fingers curling gently around his. "Is this okay?" she asked softly. Jack's throat tightened with emotions he couldn't name. "It's terrifying." "That's not what I asked." He looked down at their joined hands, brown and white, scarred and smooth, her calluses from hard work fitting against his from gripping too tightly to things that couldn't love him back. "It's okay," he whispered. "It's more than okay." They sat like that as the sun rose higher, 2 people learning that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is hold on instead of letting go. Later, Jack would deal with Victoria, would call his lawyers and gather evidence and fight for the empire he'd built, would face the board and the SEC and the court of public opinion. But for now, In this quiet morning, he let himself be held by the gentle pressure of Jennifer's hand in his. And for the first time in 30 years, he felt something he'd forgotten was possible. He felt safe. Victoria arrived unannounced on Sunday evening, her timing impeccable as always. She swept through the Manor's entrance with the confidence of someone who'd already won, her designer heels clicking a victory march against the marble. She found them in the library. Jack was at his desk reviewing legal documents, and Jeniffer was curled in the armchair by the window with a book. Not cleaning, not working, just existing in his space like she belonged there. Their proximity was casual, comfortable, domestic. Victoria's blood turned to ice. "Jack, darling." Her voice could have cut glass. "We need to talk. Privately." Jack looked up, and Victoria saw something in his expression that made her want to scream. He looked peaceful. After everything, the SEC investigation, the impending board revolt, his empire crumbling, he looked more at ease than she'd seen him in 7 years. And he was looking at the maid. "Whatever you need to say, you can say in front of Jeniffer," Jack said calmly. The casual use of her first name, the implicit trust. Victoria's carefully constructed plans threatened to collapse into pure rage, but she'd spent years learning to weaponize her emotions instead of displaying them. "Very well." Victoria placed a manila folder on Jack's desk with theatrical precision. "I've uncovered something disturbing. Evidence that someone in your household has been selling your confidential information to your competitors." Jack's expression shuddered immediately. Victoria watched with satisfaction as the walls started rebuilding, as the old fear crept back into his eyes. "What evidence?" "Digital footprints. Email sent from an internal IP address to executives at Blackstone Capital. Confidential merger documents, board meeting minutes, strategic plans." Victoria's voice dripped false sympathy, all traced back to the staff network, all sent over the past 3 weeks. 3 weeks, exactly how long Jeniffer had been working there. Jack's hands tightened on his desk. Victoria could see his mind working, could see him drawing the same conclusions she'd carefully constructed for him. Trust equals betrayal. Closeness equals destruction. The old equation reasserting itself. "That's impossible," Jennifer's voice cut through the tension, calm but firm. "I would never—" "Of course you'd deny it." Victoria turned to her with a smile that could freeze oceans. "But the evidence is quite clear. You had access, you had opportunity, and frankly, dear, you had motive. $25,000 a month is generous, but I imagine selling corporate secrets pays considerably more." "Jack!" Jeniffer stood, her book fallen forgotten to the floor. "You know me. You know I wouldn't do this." But did he? Victoria could see the question forming in Jack's eyes, could see 30 years of trauma roaring back to life. He'd trusted his mother, and she'd left him in the worst way possible. He'd trusted his father and been abandoned to his grief. He'd trusted Victoria herself, and well, he didn't know that part yet, but he would see the pattern, would see that everyone he'd ever let close had taken something precious and left him bleeding. "The security logs don't lie," Victoria pressed, moving in for the kill. "The IT department has already confirmed it. Those emails were sent from her assigned device, her login credentials, her access privileges that you personally authorized." Jack stood slowly, and Jeniffer took a step toward him. "Jack, please, look at me. You know this doesn't make sense. Why would I—" "Don't!" The word came out sharp, desperate. Jack's hand rose in a gesture that was half warning, half plea. Don't come any closer. The walls were rebuilding. Victoria could see them rising brick by brick, could see Jack retreating into the fortress that had kept him alone and safe for 3 decades. I think you should leave, Jack said, his voice hollow. Immediately. Jack, no. Jennifer's composure finally cracked. Don't do this. Don't let fear make this decision for you. Security will escort you out. Jack wouldn't look at her, couldn't look at her, because if he did, he might see the truth, and the truth was too terrifying. You'll receive 2 months' severance. Consider it generous, given the circumstances. Given the circumstances, Jennifer's voice rose with disbelief and hurt. The circumstances are that someone is framing me, and you're too afraid to see it because seeing it means trust in me, and trust terrifies you more than being alone. The words hit like bullets. Jack flinched but held his ground, his jaw tight, his hands trembling slightly at his sides. Mrs. Chen will handle the arrangements. I held you. Jennifer's voice broke. 2 days ago, I held you while you fell apart, and I stayed when anyone with sense would have run. And this is how you repay that? By believing I'd betray you? Everyone betrays me eventually. Jack's words came out bitter and broken. At least this time I saw it coming before it destroyed me completely. Victoria watched with barely concealed triumph as Mrs. Chen appeared to escort Jennifer out. The girl didn't fight, didn't make a scene. She just looked at Jack with those devastatingly compassionate eyes one last time and said softly, I hope someday you realize that the person destroying you isn't the one walking out the door. Then she was gone, and Jack was alone again, exactly as he'd been for 30 years, exactly as Victoria needed him to be. I'm sorry you had to go through that, Victoria murmured, moving to Jack's side. I know you were starting to care for her, but better to find out now than after she'd done irreparable damage. Jack didn't respond. He was staring at the empty doorway, his face pale. His hands clenched so tightly his knuckles had gone white. And in that moment Victoria realized she might have won the battle but miscalculated the war, because Jack didn't look relieved. He looked utterly, devastatingly broken. The silence in the manor was different after Jennifer left. It wasn't the controlled quiet Jack had spent 30 years cultivating. It was the hollow emptiness of something vital being ripped away. He lasted 4 hours. 4 hours of sitting in his study, staring at Victoria's evidence folder, his mind churning through the same loop of justifications. He'd done the right thing, protected himself, maintained control before betrayal could destroy him. All the old mantras that had kept him safe for 3 decades. But they felt like lies now. At midnight, Jack opened his laptop and did what he should have done immediately. He looked at the actual data instead of Victoria's carefully curated summary, called his head of IT security, a man who'd worked for him for 12 years and owed him nothing but the truth. Mr. Spencer, it's late. Is everything? The internal breach. The emails to Blackstone Capital. I need you to pull the raw server logs, not the summary. Everything. A pause. Sir, Miss Stone already has that information. She compiled the report herself. Jack's blood went cold. She compiled it? I thought I had discovered the breach. No, sir. Miss Stone came to us Friday evening with suspicions about unusual activity. She had us pull specific logs, specific date ranges. We just confirmed what she'd already The IT director stopped. "Sir, is there a problem?" Jack's hands were already flying across the keyboard, pulling up access logs, timestamps, digital fingerprints. Victoria had asked IT to look in exactly the right places at exactly the right times to find damning evidence. But she'd made one critical mistake. She'd assumed Jack was too traumatized to question her narrative. She'd forgotten he hadn't built an empire by accepting convenient explanations. 2 hours later, Jack had the complete picture. The emails were real, sent from Jennifer's login credentials, but the IP address didn't match. The sends originated from the executive floor, specifically from the office Victoria used when she visited. The timing coincided with Victoria's presence in the manor. And buried deep in the metadata was evidence of credential spoofing, the kind that required sophisticated access and technical knowledge far beyond what a recently hired maid would possess. Victoria had framed Jeniffer, systematically, deliberately, and Jack had been so eager to retreat into his old fears that he'd let her. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He'd sent away the one person who'd actually stayed, who'd sacrificed her job to hold him when he broke, who'd asked for nothing except the chance to share his burden. And he'd chosen fear over trust, isolation over love, the same pattern that had kept him alone for 30 years. Jack was out the door before he could talk himself out of it, still in the clothes he'd worn all day, his hair disheveled, his carefully maintained control completely abandoned. Mrs. Chen had put Jennifer's address in the termination paperwork. A small apartment across town, the kind of place people lived when every dollar mattered. He drove through empty streets with his heart hammering, terrified he was too late, that she'd already decided he wasn't worth the pain he caused. The apartment building was modest, paint peeling, hallway lights flickering. Jack climbed 3 flights of stairs and stood outside her door at 3 a.m., suddenly aware of how insane this was. Billionaires didn't chase after fired employees. Cold-controlled men didn't fall apart on strangers' doorsteps. But he'd stopped being that man the moment she'd touched him. Jack knocked. Silence. Then footsteps. The door opened a crack. Security chain still engaged, and Jennifer's face appeared. Eyes red from crying, expression wary. "Jack? What are you—" It was Victoria. The words tumbled out in a rush. "She framed you, spoofed your credentials, sent the emails from her office, timed everything to make you look guilty. I have the evidence. I have proof. And I'm so sorry I didn't look for it immediately, that I let 30 years of fear make me choose the lie over the truth." Jeniffer stared at him through the gap in the door, her expression unreadable. "I fired you," Jack continued, his voice breaking. "You held me while I shattered, and I repaid you by believing the worst because believing the worst is easier than risking being hurt again. But I was wrong, and I'm here to ask, to beg for another chance." "Jack?" Jennifer's voice was quiet, careful. "Why should I believe this isn't just another panic response? That tomorrow you won't find a new reason to push me away?" "Because I'm done running." Jack pressed his hand against the door, wishing he could touch her instead. "For 30 years I chose safety over connection, walls over vulnerability. And it kept me alive, but it never let me live. You showed me the difference. And I'm not going to let fear control my heart anymore." The chain rattled. The door opened fully. Jeniffer stood there in oversized pajamas, arms wrapped around herself, tears streaming down her face. "I lost my job," she said. "My family needed that money. my father's treatment. I'll handle it. All of it. Medical bills, your brother's tuition, whatever your family needs. Jack took a tentative step forward. But that's not why I'm here. I'm not here to buy your forgiveness. I'm here because in 2 days, you became more essential to me than 30 years of carefully constructed isolation, and I won't go back to that empty fortress without you. Jennifer searched his face, looking for the truth beneath the words. What are you asking me, Jack? Come back. He held out his hand, palm up, vulnerable, offering instead of demanding. Not as my employee, as my partner, my equal, the person who knows my worst moments and stayed anyway. I'm asking you to take a chance on a man who's terrified of being hurt, but more terrified of being alone. I'm asking you to be my future. For a long moment, Jennifer just looked at his outstretched hand, at the man who'd spent 3 decades avoiding touch, now offering it freely. Then she placed her hand in his. One condition, she said softly. No more running. When you're scared, you talk to me. When I hurt you, you tell me. We face things together, or this doesn't work. Jack pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, feeling her warmth against his chest. Together, he promised. Always together. And for the first time in 30 years, Jack Spencer let himself believe that touch didn't equal loss. It equaled home,